Hi, you're watching Bike Routes of Brum, a channel dedicated to finding safe cycle routes across Birmingham. Now, this is going to be a slightly different video than the ones I usually make, as I'm going to focus on reviewing cycle infrastructure from a city that I've recently been to, more specifically Seville. Now, I recently got married and managed to trick my wife into going to Seville so that I could secretly go and check out the bike infrastructure under the guise of it being a honeymoon. In my dedication to the cause, I managed to sneak out one morning and do some filming to see what the cycling was like around the city. So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about my thoughts on the bike routes there, and if there's anything that I think Birmingham could learn from to make our city more accessible for your average everyday cyclist. So one of the things I want to firstly talk about is just a bit of background on the history of Seville's bike lanes. For many years, Seville just wasn't a biking town at all, and according to The Guardian, and I'll put a link to the article in the description below that I've read, prior to the lanes being put in, I think only 0.5% of the journeys in the city were done by bike, so that's even less than Birmingham is. So that's kind of should show you roughly where they were beforehand. In 2003, though, the United Left Political Alliance, headed by the Communist Party, won enough city council seats to jointly govern with the Socialists. I'm not really sure what the makeup is of the city council now, but I guess it was a big deal at the time. One of the agreements they managed to put in place was to get plans for the cycle network confirmed, and that was, I think, one of the keystone issues for them to actually form the coalition. Once this was in place, then Seville's head of urban planning, a guy called Jose Garcia Cebrian, apologies if I completely mangled his name, he set to work planning a fully segregated 80-kilometre cycle network across the city, and I think that's the important bit here, is that from the off they had this idea of having a big, fully segregated cycle network. It was put together quite quickly. I think within 3 years the main core of the bike network was up and running, and by 2017 the network was pretty much complete. I'll put up a picture as I'm talking. You can see that in 2005 there just really wasn't much there, just a couple of these green lanes dotted around, but then by 2008 kind of the real core of it has been created. Then by 2010 they've kind of expanded it a bit quite nicely, and then 2017 you can see it is a really good network. There's just a hole in the middle, and that's kind of the old town, and you can't really fit any sort of segregated bike lane there. One of the things that the article was saying was that because it was a political decision and part of the kind of coalition, it was really important to get it done as quickly as possible, get that network built before suddenly the political winds changed, as we see now in the UK, where suddenly a government will start doing something, and then once they get a sniff that maybe some people don't like it, they just completely bottle it and go the other way. So I think they found it really important to just get it built as quickly as possible. So were there any benefits, any drawbacks? Well, by the time COVID rolled around, so by 2020, 10% of the trips were made by bike. So it's gone from 0.5% in 2003 to 10% of all trips being made by bike. So that's a huge increase. And cycle trips on a work day increased from 13,000 to a peak of 72,000 per day. That's a 452% increase in 3 years. So yeah, it was a massive success, and you see it now just going around Seville. You can see that people just cycle around. They're not sports cyclists, they're just normal everyday people just riding their bike, which I thought was really cool. So there's a few different types of road and infrastructure that I saw in my time there. The first is, well, not really infrastructure at all, it's just a small quiet street along the riverfront. It's only one way, and it seems to have been built to slow cars down as they travel along it. It's fine to cycle along here, and if you notice the street cleaner on the bike, it shows just how normalised cycling is in Seville. You can see the little bollards along the side of the pavement to stop cars from parking there and just stopping wherever they like. The street's small and cars can't go very fast and try and overtake you, so as a cyclist you feel like you belong there. It's just nice to cycle along. The next is this two-way cycle lane that kind of ran over the bridge over the river. It's just paint that's been put over the pavement, and it's space that's been taken away from pedestrians rather than cars. It's not great, but in practice it kind of acts as a shared use pavement as people just walk wherever they want. It then morphs into this protected cycle lane that runs along the side of the 5-lane road. It's protected with these little concrete bollards, which probably won't offer that much protection, but do you know what? It works. I felt safe cycling along here. It's a clear indication that the space is for cyclists, and yeah, it's a bit thin, but who cares? It does the job. I felt alright cycling along there, and it worked. The next is probably the most common piece of infrastructure, and it's these green cycle lanes that make up the bulk of the network. Most of them are on the pavements, and this one's nicely protected by the trees. It's cool, shaded, and nice to cycle along. It's a bit wider than the one on the road, but wouldn't comply with the LTM 120 guidance we have in the UK. But do you know what? Who cares? It's fairly easy to put up, I think, and it forms the bulk of the network. I can imagine seeing that these kind of distinctive green routes everywhere would encourage people to give cycling a go once they see that they can get to where they actually want to go to. Now you can see once you get into the old town, the lanes stop, and instead you have these silver discs that run along the floor showing the bike routes. Now, again, they're more like a shared pathway. It won't stop pedestrians from walking into them, but do you know what? It doesn't matter, you're in the historic old town, so they should have priority. What it does do, though, is confirm to you that you're in the right place, and that does help. The next we have is just no infrastructure at all. It's all on one level, makes it clear to cars and bikes that you're a guest in this part of town, and it's pedestrians that have right of way. And really, I just wanted to show off the view of the beautiful cathedral. And then finally, you have this path that's been created along the riverfront. They've blatantly just taken this space from walkers and joggers again, and during the day it does get full of people, but that's fine because you still feel comfortable cycling along it. You don't feel like you're invading anyone's space, and people use it. It's great to just have a nice way of getting around the town like this, and as a tourist it's really pleasant to cycle along. The next bit I just put in to show that it doesn't have to be pretty either. They've just plunked some tarmac down here, but it makes it usable. It's smooth, and like the kind of cobblestones there, and it shows that they've just thought about making it a nicer place for cycling. So I thought I'd also have a quick talk about hiring bikes from Seville, which is the bike hire scheme that we use in Seville. These are the main rental bikes that are dotted across the city in various docks, like the Beryl bikes we have in Birmingham or the Santander ones in London. Unlike the ones in Birmingham, you have to dock them, which in my opinion is actually a better solution as long as there's a decent amount of docks. You have to download the app to use them and then register a few details. Unlike the ones in Birmingham, you don't pay as you go. Instead, you can buy a daily pass for I think €2.59 or a weekly pass for €13.33, and that's what we opted for. During this time, the first 30 minutes are free, but if you exceed this, then you have to pay something like €1 for the first hour and then €2 after that for each additional hour. I found that just if you dock it and then rebook another one within the 30 minutes works, and you didn't have to pay any more than that, so that's probably the best solution. The bikes are clunky and heavy. They have this great big metal bit that kind of sticks out, which is what you use to dock them. And I certainly wouldn't want to spend a whole day riding around on them, but do you know what, they're practical and they're pretty good for short trips. Overall, I think I prefer the actual bikes in Birmingham. I think they're better, but the pricing pattern in Seville is probably a lot better, and having a network to use them on means that they're probably used a hell of a lot more there, and I thought it was a really good way to get around the town. So finally, what can we in Birmingham learn from Seville? Well, for me, the number one thing is to build a network. That has to be the most fundamental thing in terms of getting people on a bike. I'm guessing that if you're watching this video and you're not my dad just watching this on repeat so I get more views, you probably already know this and I'm just preaching to the choir. But just knowing that if you hop on a bike, you'll be able to get from where you are to where you want to get to pretty much on a safe cycling infrastructure, then of course you're going to consider cycling as an option. In Birmingham, we've got the A38 cycle lane, which is a great piece of infrastructure, but it doesn't link up with anywhere really. So unless you're going between Selly Oak and the outskirts of the city centre, it's not much help to you. Having a proper linked up network is absolutely key. A bunch of random bike paths that stop abruptly is just useless. The second important lesson is that what the network does have to do is feel protected. It doesn't need massive curbs or anything, but it does need some sort of barrier between you and the cars. Paint just won't work. I use my wife as a barometer for this kind of thing, as she doesn't like to cycle anywhere near cars. In Birmingham, completely understandably, she'll pretty much just go along the Ray Valley route. She hasn't tried the A38 route, but I'd imagine that would be alright for her too. In Seville, she happily cycled along the cycle routes, including that one on the 5-lane road that I showed earlier. Having something there, even if it's just little plastic ones or little concrete lumps in the video, it does a lot to make people feel safe. It's that feeling of safety that encourages people to actually use the network that you've built. There's no point in just drawing a network on the road using paint if there's no protection. Average people aren't going to feel comfortable cycling along it, and confident people won't want to use it. And all that happens is drivers get annoyed seeing unused painted lanes everywhere. So my takeaway from all this is to build a network and make it feel safe. And it seems kind of obvious once you actually spell it out like that. And Seville's awesome, by the way. If you haven't been, I definitely recommend it. And try cycling when you're out there and see if you agree with me. So thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I know it's been a bit different to my usual content, but normal service will resume. Thank you.